All right. Good morning. This is Tim Stewart. I am president at Visual Decisions, and we're here today to talk about the relationship between Industry 4.0 and standard work. At Visual Decisions, we've been in the business of utilizing information from the shop floor to improve continuous improvement since about 2002. We help our customers combine the smart factory and the lean factory to drive improvements to cost, throughput, and quality. Our customers have seen dramatic improvements, such as 30% increases in OEE, 50% scrap reductions, and much more. But just like wearing a Fitbit won't automatically make you thin, implementing technology for Industry 4.0 won't automatically make the business better. The culture of the organization and the business processes must be adapted to take advantage of the new capabilities to drive real improvements. And what we're going to be talking about today with standard work really shows how you can help change that culture utilizing standard work to really reinforce those changes within the organization. As a quick procedural note, if you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A. I'll get back to them at the end of the webinar. Thank you. So the goal for today is to explore how to use Industry 4.0 to enhance your standard work and how to use standard work to make your Industry 4.0 rollout that much more successful. So if you've come to this webinar, I imagine you know something about both Industry 4.0 and standard work, but I figure I'll take 60 seconds or so to just talk about the value of standard work. And by talking about standard work, I'm taking a broad view and incorporating leader standard work and standard work for the support organizations within manufacturing and so forth as well. And so the goals for standard work for operators include reducing the variability in the process. So if you have one operator running a machine at one set of settings and another operation coming in for second shift and changing those settings to run the process in a different way, you're going to get different results. And so part of standard work is to make sure that everybody runs the same process in the same way. You incorporate best practices into everything, and you standardize as much as possible so that you get consistent results within your manufacturing process. And then it's also maintaining gains that you make from Kaizen events. So as part of your Kaizen event, you should always be updating your standard work so that you can maintain the gains that you make during that Kaizen process. I remember speaking with the head of continuous improvement for United Technologies, UTC Corporation, and what he said stuck with me. It was, if they had been able to maintain all the gains that they had made from all of their Kaizen projects over the years, you could just drive the truck past the factory and everything would spontaneously assemble and fly into the back of the truck as it drove past. But obviously entropy happens. They weren't able to maintain all of those gains, and you have to go back and re-optimize the process again. So utilizing standard work can help at least maintain those gains for some time. Leader standard work is also critical though. It can create alignment across the organization and help you have different people in the same role doing the same job or similar jobs in a similar way, and can help drive that culture of the organization to be what you want it to be. You can standardize the use of metrics. So whether you're looking at a OKR process or a KPI process, or just a Hoshin process or policy deployment and so forth. However you do that within your organization, you can create the standardization of those metrics across your different people and your different groups. So standard work is very important. So how does Industry 4.0 actually help standard work? And we'll get into more details as we go through the presentation. But you can help deliver the right information to the right place at the right time. And that can help any number of different people doing different jobs. And we'll see a lot of examples of that as we go through. Augmenting people in the organization with new capabilities. So as you're creating your standard work, you want that standard work to be as optimal as possible. So how can you help the people in their different roles do as good of a job as they possibly can? and what are the tools that you can give them to do so. You can encourage adoption of new and standardized work practices. By utilizing standard work, by utilizing technology, you can help them do work in a certain way because you're augmenting that work with those tools. And so you can really help drive that standardization by putting those tools in place. And then you can kind of detect and elevate attention to the deviations from standards. So if you're monitoring the process in detail on a 24/7 basis, you can certainly see when someone has turned the knob to do things differently. Conversely, how does standard work actually help Industry 4.0? And Industry 4.0 solutions can really provide little value until behaviors change. And the example that I use all the time, or the analogy that I use all the time, is a Fitbit. I've been wearing a Fitbit since about 2013, and I really haven't lost any weight in that time. And the reason that I haven't lost the weight isn't due to the Fitbit. The Fitbit works great. It tracks all my steps, gives me all the pretty charts and graphs. But until I change my behaviors, until I act differently tomorrow than I do today, I'm not going to lose the weight. And it's the same thing on the shop floor. You can implement any of these different systems that you want, but until you change the behaviors of the people, until they do something differently on the shop floor than they do today, you're not going to see the gains that you want to see. And so by utilizing standard work as a tool to help enforce those new practices, you can actually make your Industry 4.0 implementation that much more successful. And you can help drive adoption of the new solution. In addition to that, sometimes you're looking for manual data inputs for things such as reason codes on downtime events and so forth. The machines will often report something like an e-stop. And if you just record e-stop, then you're not going to get a lot of insight into what drove that disruption to the process. But if you get the operators involved and you get them actually reporting what happened during that e-stop, now you have a higher level of information that you can use to improve the process on an ongoing basis. But that has to become part of the standard work for that process to enter that information in. And then the use of these systems by leaders really helps validate the data and drive usage of the solutions as well. So let's look at the Industry 4.0 impact by different organizations and different teams within the factory. So we'll start with operator standard work. And there are a lot of different ways that Industry 4.0 can impact the standard work of that operator. And the first and kind of most obvious one is work instructions. So as you deliver work instructions out to the shop floor, traditionally, there have been paper-based work instructions that went to that operation that the operator would have to, go out of his process to look at, and then return to his process to actually do the work and so forth. And even if the paper was located right there, he'd still have to turn away from what he was doing in order to reference that paperwork. And so with something like augmented reality, you can actually deliver those work instructions visually right in front of them as they're doing the work. Data collection is another obvious one. If you have operators currently doing like tick sheets when the process stops, or you have quality issues and so forth, obviously that can be automated and you can change the standard work around the data collection. Visual controls. So as you're trying to provide feedback to the operators as they're doing the process, you can certainly utilize Industry 4.0 or digital technologies to give them that feedback of how the process is going. Are they winning or losing for that day? And you can build up that standard work around making sure that they're hitting their goals. Augmented operators. And so one example that I use here is welding operation. One of the really cool implementations of augmented reality that I've seen is actually putting an augmented reality display in the visor for a welder. And as he's welding his piece, he gets visual feedback within that welding visor of what percentage the weld is complete, whether he's following the path that he needs to follow, whether there have been any quality issues with the weld so far and so forth. And so you can do a lot to kind of augment that operator as he's doing his work. Quality and testing is another way that you can utilize these technologies in order to really supplement what the operator is doing on their own. Leader standard work is another big opportunity. And for those that have really embraced lean manufacturing, you should understand what I mean by leader standard work. But if you don't, it's the idea that not just operators should be doing the same work in the same way every day, that the plant leadership, whether it's supervisors or the plant manager or anywhere in between within that hierarchy, should also have at least portions of their work that are standard on a shift by shift, day by day, week by week basis. And you have things like daily accountability programs that the management should go through. You know, your plant manager should do a daily Gemba walk through the factory and actually, go see what's happening in the different processes and so forth. There are certain metrics that he should be paying attention to on a regular basis and so on. And so, as the leader is doing that standard work, and just taking Gemba walk as an example here, he should be able to see information utilizing Industry 4.0 that he didn't have access to in the past. So as he's going through and walking through the plant, he should be able to, bring a tablet with him and be able to see the metrics for that process as he's going through the plant. And so, yes, he should still do all of the interpersonal things that are traditional in a Gemba walk and so forth, but he can be much more informed about the process and how it's operating as he goes through that. How you run shift change and stand-up meetings and so forth can be completely different based on the information that you have available to you now with with Industry 4.0. And so how you structure, pretty much every meeting should change based on the data that you now have available. The visual controls that you put in place, your daily accountability checklists and so forth should be adapted. Digital management operating system, if you are a lean practitioner, you've probably heard of a management operating system before. And it's basically the set of practices that the business uses as a whole to really manage the operation of the facilities. And I'll get a little bit more into detail on that one later on. And then just how you allocate resources. So you don't have an infinite number of maintenance people. If you have more maintenance issues than you have maintenance people, how do you allocate those resources and so forth? How do you decide what the process engineers are going to be working on? How do you decide which Kaizen events to run at any given time and so forth? You should be utilizing data for those decisions, and Industry 4.0 can provide a much finer grain of detail than you've ever had before. Other groups that are impacted, and really at the bottom, the answer is everyone. With Industry 4.0 solutions, it's really kind of an infinite number of things that you can do with those within the plant, whether it's quality related or production related, material handling, tracking things with RFID chips through the facility and so forth. There's really no limit to what you can do with these technologies from a data perspective of tracking everything, utilizing that to improve the processes and so forth. And so how everybody goes about their jobs should really change based on these technologies. So as you're implementing something, it's not just for production. So it's not just the operators or the supervisors who should be looking at this data. It should be everybody as they're doing their jobs. And I'll walk through some specific examples of this as we go through. All right, so what are some of the different impacts by activity that we can look at here? And I'm going to pick on AR first, because the augmented reality solutions that are out there in the marketplace really offer some incredible changes to standard work, whether it's augmenting how we do maintenance or the operators and so forth. But these are things that, in my opinion, just haven't been possible before. Something like IoT really just expands existing capabilities. We've had software that collected data from the shop floor for a long time now. IoT expands what we can do with that, and we have new sensors available and so forth that we didn't have in the past. And we can pipe that into machine learning algorithms and so forth. But augmented reality really opens up an entire new class of things that we haven't been able to do in the past. And so I'll spend a few minutes walking through some of these things as well. So for AR, some of the different categories that we can look at here are expert guidance, work instructions, augmented training, remote assistance, and so forth. And if we look at the expert guidance and so forth, this is the idea that you may have a limited number of experts within your organization, and how do you take those experts and take their knowledge and get that out to everybody that it could impact? So if you have multiple facilities within your organization, how can you take the person that knows this process the best and utilize their knowledge across all of your different facilities? How do you capture that so that when they retire or they leave and go to a different organization, you don't lose that knowledge base, you don't lose those skills and so forth? And with AR, we can really fairly easily capture that expertise and make that available to the organization as a whole. And so with these guys, I talked about different people running a process in different ways and so forth. What you can really do is identify using the data who runs this process the best, and then capture their knowledge of how they do that with the augmented reality solutions so that everybody can run the process in that same way. The 3D work instructions. So I've talked about, the paper work instructions and having to basically look away from the work that you're doing to go look at paper work instructions and then go back to the process. With augmented reality, it's really possible to overlay the work instructions right on the work that you're doing. So I gave the example of the welder. Another really good example is pick and place, where using augmented reality, based on the unit that I'm building that's in front of me right now, and it can change, every single unit could be a different SKU. But based on the unit that I have in front of me right now, the augmented reality glasses can actually highlight the bin that I should be pulling the next piece from, and then show on the actual unit where I'm supposed to put that piece and how it's supposed to fit, as well as giving me work instructions for how I'm supposed to fit that in there and what quality checks I should do along the way. And so there are tremendous capabilities to really help get new employees up to speed much faster, to do poke-yoke or error proofing as we go through this, because if somebody grabs from the wrong bin, they'll get a visual cue that they've grabbed the wrong part. If they try to assemble it in the wrong way, it can be something where they get a visual cue there that it wasn't assembled correctly. And so there's tremendous capabilities to really drive out errors from the process through doing this. Remote assistance. This is something where if for our maintenance team and how they go about their work and so forth. If I have a machine go down, instead of having a maintenance person come out to the machine, if I have a phone or a tablet, maybe my first step is now to actually show the people from the maintenance department what is happening at the machine. And by having them look at that before they come out to the machine, instead of waiting for that response time, if they can give immediate feedback to the operator based on what they can see to just do these steps, then the machine can be back up and running, and I don't have to wait for that response time from the maintenance person. So I can reduce my overall mean time to repair by greatly reducing that mean time to respond. And even when they can't have the operator make the fix, if they can better diagnose what's happening in that machine, the first time fix rate can go up significantly, where when they go out to the machine, they're already prepared with what they need to do to fix that machine instead of going out to diagnose it and then going back to the maintenance department for the right tools or parts, and then coming back out to the process. One second. All right, so manufacturing has really embraced technology and automation. And when we look at some of the things like lasers and augmented reality and robots and cobots and so forth, there's been tremendous adoption of different technologies within the manufacturing process. As a lean expert myself, or someone has a very strong lean background myself, I can honestly say that continuous improvement has not evolved as quickly. And if you look at some of the insistence on still doing things through whiteboards or paper forms, or printed off Excel spreadsheets and so forth, clearly there is room to evolve for continuous improvement professionals. And so I'm going to look at some of the standard processes that some of the support teams use within manufacturing and talk about how we can utilize some Industry 4.0 technologies to adapt those as well. So when we look at visual controls and their impact on the organization, visual controls can have a very large impact on the culture of that organization. So you're utilizing those controls to help people understand if they're winning or losing in a day, help them focus on the things that are important, give them feedback in across different metrics such as safety, quality, delivery, cost, manpower, inventory, environmental, and so forth, and really focus their attention on the things that they need to do. But it's a very wasteful process today to either have somebody go out there and write these things on a whiteboard, or to print things off in Excel and continually update those sheets of paper and so forth. And then if you're writing on a whiteboard, having somebody come in at the end of the shift and writing those things down in Excel, and then saving that Excel spreadsheet to a shared drive. And if you want to analyze across different days, you've got to pull up multiple Excel spreadsheets and so forth. It's all very wasteful process. So one of the things that we can put in place is digital visual controls. And I understand the pushback, and if somebody is interested, I did an entire webinar a few weeks ago on visual controls and why you don't really lose anything when you move to a digital visual control as opposed to the manual. And I definitely get that there's hesitancy there, but overall, I think that the value dramatically increases once you do this. Because what you can do is, instead of having people focus on writing that information on the whiteboard or coloring in the sheets as this gentleman is doing in the upper left, you can have people still utilize that information as part of their standard work. You still have the standard work around looking at absorbing and utilizing that data. You just eliminate the waste from the process. So the standard work here is the key to still getting the value from those visual controls, so that it doesn't become just a decoration on the wall, but you actually utilize that data to improve the process, to move things forward. And so standard work is very key in putting those digital controls in place and still getting the value from that, and not losing that value of having people's fingerprints on the data. How you run a Kaizen process should change a lot based on having these capabilities within your organization. So if you think about how you run Kaizen projects today, and honestly, this is why I started Visual Decisions in the first place, was as a lean practitioner, and I was at a lean consulting company at the time, I got really tired of going into companies and not having data on where the biggest problems were. And then once we determined where the biggest problems were, instead of just listening to who was screaming the loudest or what machine broke last, now as you get into your Kaizen project, you start by collecting data from the shop floor, and you go out there old school clipboard stopwatch kind of a thing, and start tracking data for when the machine goes down and why it goes down and so forth. And if we look at 6 traditional steps in a Kaizen project, every single one of those can be impacted by Industry 4.0 and how we go about that. And so the standard work that you have around something like a Kaizen process should be adapted based on the fact that you've done this Industry 4.0 implementation, and now you have those new capabilities available. So as you're going through these software and technology implementations, you should really look at every process within your factory and think about how you can utilize that data more effectively. Even something like value stream mapping is something that's traditionally done in a conference room. You have a group of people that are putting sticky notes on a wall, kind of like these guys are. And everyone is kind of estimating how long does this process take? How long does it take between processes and so forth? What are the right steps that this should go through and so forth, or that it does go through today? Or maybe you have people go out to the floor with, again, clipboard stopwatch and actually take data on how that process is operating that day for that product family. And all of that can change. So instead of doing your value stream mapping for one product at a time, because that's really all that you manually have the capacity to do, you can really actually do your value stream mapping for every product at the same time, because you're gathering data across your entire facility. And so you should have a pretty good handle on exactly how much time this work order is spending on this process. And I should know exactly when it starts the next step. And so I should know what was my non-value add time between steps. I should be able to understand how much variability I have in the amount of time that those activities take, at that step, how much variability I have in that time between processes and so forth. I should be able to look at not only the average time, but the entire distribution as well. I should show deviations from the process where I don't follow the standard route and so forth. How often do I go through a rework cycle and so on? It's continually live. So it's not a project that I do once. It's actually something that is evergreen, because I'm continuing to collect data every single day. So I still have that information available. So how I go about value stream mapping and the entire mindset of a value stream map can change. It's not something I do as a project and then say, okay, I'm going to look at this, I'm going to map out the current process, and now I'm going to imagine a future state. It's something where I can continually track the evolution of that process as I go through my iterations of small Kaizen events. I should be able to see how that process evolves over time and compare it to say, am I getting better or am I getting worse? Am I reducing the amount of variation in the process, et cetera? And so rather than this huge focus on doing the manual mapping and doing the data collection and so forth, you can again shift that focus and shift the investment and time of your people from doing that grunt work that's non-value add to doing the value add activity of imagining what the future state could be and implementing those changes. I mentioned a digital management operating system earlier, and the example that I have here is something that we did for Chief Operating Officer at an automotive tier 2 supplier. And what we looked at was metrics across safety, quality, delivery costs, inventory, manpower, and environmental. And I think there were 26 in all that he was tracking across 4 different facilities. And what we wanted to do was to understand really, were people winning or were they losing? If they missed their target, how much did they miss by? What was the explanation for that miss? What was the corrective action to put in place? And then track that over time to make sure that that corrective action is actually doing what it was supposed to do. And so we started off at the COO level of determining what the metrics should be and so forth. But then we actually went all the way down to the bottom of the process to collect information directly from the machines and kind of bottle the information at the source. And by doing that, we were able to aggregate that information from all of the different processes in all of the different plants up all the way to the COO. And everybody at every level of the organization had their own view of the process, had their own measures that they were tied to and that they cared about. And so we were able to create that alignment throughout the entire organization. But it was even more than that. It was, how do we create the standard work around doing this? And so the COO had his weekly cadence call with his plant managers, where he went through this report and focused on one plant at a time and looked at every red metric for that plant for that week, and went through very quickly, what was the reason for the miss? Were they, was it a one-time thing, or do they need to put a corrective action in place? If so, what is the corrective action? Who's responsible? When do they expect it completed, and so forth? And just went quickly through each plant and each metric. And he expected his plant managers in turn to have the next level drill down of this, where instead of the different plants, they could see their different departments or their different lines, et cetera. And they would go through that same exact cadence with their people the day before the meeting with the COO. And they would walk through the exact same thing. What were the issues? What were the reasons? What are they doing about it? So that they would then in turn be prepared for that COO. And then they expected the level beneath that to do the same thing down to the individual machine level. And so they created this standard work that drove alignment all the way from the COO down to the individual operators. And it really drove a high level of culture around paying attention to the same things and driving improvement around those from a week-to-week basis. So, some closing thoughts. I mentioned maintaining fingerprints on the process, and when I talk about standard work and utilizing standard work to improve the implementation of an Industry 4.0 initiative, or using Industry 4.0 to improve standard work, either way, I usually get some pushback that that's not the way that we do things, that we have our lean processes over here on the left side, and over here on the right side we have our technology or operational technologies and what we're doing around Industry 4 and so forth, and they don't really cross. And one is viewed as kind of human-centric and one is technology. And in my opinion, that's the wrong way to think about it. You should be thinking how you work those two together. Again, going back to the example of the Fitbit, or the analogy of the Fitbit, it's you have to utilize the behaviors to take advantage of the technology. And if you do this the right way, you can drive greater involvement of your people. And there's synergy that goes both ways, again, with the technology and how it can support standard work, and how the standard work can support the implementation of those technologies. But you can get people more involved with technology, and not something where they become removed from the process because you've put technology in there. You can drive better lasting ownership. And the one that I think is the absolute biggest one is the improved understanding. With these technologies, you can really, really dig deep into what are the reasons why things happen on the shop floor, and drive that improved understanding of those things so that you can make improvements as you go forward. So with that, if there are any questions, please enter them into the Q&A. And I don't see any questions in there right now. So with that, thank you very much. I'll be following up with all of you as we go forward, just to make sure that this was valuable for you, and that if you have any questions, I can get those answered as well. So thank you, and have a great day.